Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on the bilateral relationship between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, both considered to be the cornerstones of the security and the sovereignty of each other and the whole Middle East region. We're also going to be talking about boosting the trade cooperation and investments between both countries. But before we start discussing this file, let's check out some of the stories making the news today. And we'll start off with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who held talks with Prime Minister Mohammed and Minister of International Cooperation, Rania al-Mashad, on Tuesday, that centered on ongoing efforts exerted by the ministry to enhance cooperation with Egypt's international partners and financial institutions. Presidential spokesperson Ambassador Bassam Radi said that during the meeting, President al-Sisi instructed to continue cooperation with the international institutions to support financing the sustainable development sectors. The head of state gave his directives to an optimal usage and governance of international financing packages, as well as expanding efforts to nationalize industry, investment in human capital and in environment-oriented projects. Minister Mashad reviewed her ministry's efforts in coordination with the state's concerned bodies to support the national project to develop the Egyptian countryside within the framework of the Decent Life Initiative in a bid to promote the objectives and programs of this project. Minister Mashad also presented her ministry's activities in coordination with the United Nations and various national authorities to implement the strategic framework for the partnership between the two sides, which include achieving a comprehensive economic development, social protection programs, women's empowerment, as well as projects to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship. Also today, President al-Sisi met Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli and Minister of Supply and Domestic Trade, Alim Salhi. During the meeting, the President followed up on the situation regarding the strategic reserve of food and basic commodities, as well as reviewing the plan to establish and raise the efficiency of strategic silos and warehouses nationwide, and as well the state's efforts to develop the bakery system. President al-Sisi gave directives for the development and mechanization of the silos and warehouse systems nationwide in order to facilitate the storage of strategic goods, while selecting the best locations for these silos and warehouses to be accessible by roads and its proximity to deliver outlets. And Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry headed to Berlin today to participate in the second Berlin conference on Libya tomorrow. The minister will deliver Egypt's speech, which is expected to reassert its position over the need to protect Libya's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to support its people's aspirations for a better future. His address will stress the necessity to support efforts aimed at activating the comprehensive political process led by Libyans, including withdrawing all foreign forces and disarming terrorist groups in the country. The Libyan transitional government and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will converge in Berlin for the in-person UN-sponsored talks. The conference aims to expel terrorists from Libya and keep the country on track for the December 24th election. The presidents of Russia, Turkey and France had vowed to end foreign meddling in Libya and withdraw foreign terrorists or troops. A formal truce agreed last October led to the creation of a transitional government under Prime Minister Abdelhamid Dbeibeh and a presidential council headed by Mohammed Yunus Menfi, which has promised to hold polls. These were some of the stories making the news today, but now let's turn our attention to our topic in hand. And let's check out this report regarding President al-Sisi reasserting and affirming that the security and stability of Saudi Arabia is part and parcel of Egypt's own national security. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi affirmed Egypt's solid historical relations with Saudi Arabia at all levels, stressing its constant position on supporting the security and stability of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as it is part of Egypt's national security. President al-Sisi's comments came during his meeting with the Minister of Commerce of Saudi Arabia, Majid bin Abdullah al-Qasabi, in presence of the Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Hala Said, and Minister of Trade and Industry, Naveen Gama, along with ambassadors of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to Egypt, Osama Naqli, and President of the Saudi-Egyptian Business Council, Bandar al-Amiri. The President conveyed his greetings to the custodian of the two holy mosques, His Majesty King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, and Saudi Crown Prince Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Furthermore, the head of state affirmed his full support of promoting inter-trade and increasing joint investment projects between the two countries in various development fields, in furtherance the common interests of the two countries. The President noted that the government is keen to communicate regularly with Saudi investors to support their activities in Egypt. For his part, the Saudi minister conveyed greetings to President al-Sisi from his two brothers, the King and Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The minister stressed the strength and specificity of the relationship between the two brotherly countries and expressed his appreciation of Egypt's pivotal role in the region, as it represents a main pillar of security and stability in the Arab world. He commented on the comprehensive development renaissance that Egypt has been witnessing under the leadership of President al-Sisi during the past years since the start of the economic reform process. Minister al-Qasabi hailed Egypt's efforts to provide a favorable investment climate to enhance the business environment, establish major projects being implemented across the country, and create diverse and promising investment opportunities in all sectors, thus making a remarkable qualitative leap in all aspects of life in Egypt.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here in the studio by my distinguished guest, Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the professor of the Middle East politics at the American University in Cairo. Dr. Fahmy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, my pleasure. Thank you.
Dr. Fahmy, talking about the Egyptian-Saudi relations now, they're historical relations. Every few years, it's always marked by some sort of a major event, a major political development or economic development, coalitions, teaming up, fighting common enemies or being involved together in certain conflicts. How would you describe the situation or the relationship between both countries nowadays in this time that we're actually witnessing?
Well, I mean, just like you mentioned, historically, Egyptian-Saudi relations have been the cornerstone of stability in the region. And this goes a long back, maybe in history, ever since the establishment of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a sovereign state back in the 1930s. Ever since then, the relations between the two countries have been really pivotal for the development of the region as a whole. Recently, we have a number of files that both countries are very concerned with or interested in stabilizing for their best interest. Of course, the first of which, in the case of Egypt, would be the issue of the JERD and their ongoing negotiations with Ethiopia in that regard. For Saudi Arabia, it's Iran and the threat coming from that part of the world, and also the conflict in Yemen, which also poses a great threat to the stability and security of Saudi Arabia. In addition to these, of course, there's a number of files like Libya, for instance, like the the broader, again, relations also in places like Syria and the situation in Iraq. So pretty much all the files in the region would be on the agenda at this juncture between the two countries.
Yes. Well, you've mentioned two issues that are quite critical for the national security of both countries. Let's start with the first one. The JERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Now, Egypt has the backing of Saudi Arabia in this file, but Egypt has the backing of many different countries, be it African or Gulf countries or European countries. And we're seeing a lot of condemnation from the international community, a lot of their support to Egypt and Sudan's stance. How effective do you see Saudi Arabia's stance in regards to the negotiations between Egypt, Sudan with Ethiopia?
Well, very effective. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, pressure to be done by Saudi Arabia on Ethiopia in that regard. You know, KSA is still a major investor in several African countries, including Ethiopia. And this is a great weapon that can be utilized. I believe that over the past few months, there has been increasing, escalating, I would say, pressure from the side of Saudi Arabia on the Ethiopian government, just like with lots of other donors, also regional and international. But again, Ethiopia is not willing to yield to this increase in pressure. They're still trying to resist. They're still trying to, repeat their messaging regarding this being the right of Ethiopia to achieve its own development and so forth. But over these, I would say, days, and especially that we're approaching now the time of filling, the second filling in July. So it's a very critical time period. And I think the pressure that will be mounting over the coming days is very important. I think Saudi does have a big role to play in these coming days regarding increasing or stressing the pressure on the Ethiopian government further.
Well, you're saying that the time factor can really pile up pressure on Ethiopia, and we're seeing Egypt really moving ahead with the support and really the preparations for this date with the filling and operation of the dam. And also Ethiopia is going through its own elections nowadays.
Yes.
Do you see rapid developments taking place up until that date?
You definitely hope so. For the best interest, I would say, of all parties, really, because escalating this situation further is not in the best interest of any of the countries involved, including Egypt and Sudan and Ethiopia. For the best interest, I would say, of all countries, there needs to be a legal framework, an agreement, a binding agreement, just like Egypt and Sudan have been calling for a long time now. And we have maybe a week to reach this agreement over the coming period. Most recently, I'd say, very interestingly, there was a declaration and an announcement by the EU regarding the importance of an agreement being reached between the three countries before the second filling. So again, just like you were mentioning, there's mounting pressure not only from the regional or the Arab actors, but also from the international community. And I think this is the only way forward, because over the coming period, I don't think that involving multilateral institutions such as the African Union or even the UN Security Council at this very limited period of time would bear fruit. There needs to be pressure from strong actors, whether regional or international, to reach some sort of a resolution over this very tight time period.
And imagining the worst case scenario that no political, legal, binding agreement is reached within these days, what would happen? How effective can the international community be? Would it really? What would be stronger, the independent or individual stances of the international community, or would it be the stance of the UN Security Council or the United Nations, these revered international institutions, which would be more effective in dealing with a scenario where there's no agreement?
Ideally, you would like to utilize all of the possible cards. For a country like Egypt, and I think we've seen that over the past years, especially since maybe after 2013, we're seeing an increasing dependence or diversification of international relations resources. So we don't only depend on one main actor like before, so we have good ties with several countries, including Russia, China, the US, France, and Britain, the veto powers in the Security Council, the P5. But at the same time, these forces, these international powers also have their own interests. And it's not likely over the coming few weeks or even further for them to reach an agreement with no veto on a Security Council resolution, because as you know, under the Security Council regulations, for the resolution to be binding, of course all the resolutions are binding, but in order for it to be enforced, it has to fall under what they call Chapter 6 and 7. So in order for them to reach agreement on such a strong resolution, for it to be implemented by force, enforcing or pressing Ethiopia to adopt it over the coming period with all the disagreements in the international scene currently, I think it's a bit far-fetched. It's important for Egypt to, of course, resort to the Security Council because it shows the depth or the profound impact of this crisis on Egypt. And as a matter of fact, there has been a resolution that was proposed by Egypt since last year, and this resolution has not been yet adopted. So, any kind of, just the mere, I would say, notion of the Security Council discussing this issue, it shows or sends a signal to the rest of the world and to Ethiopia that this is a matter of major impact on the international peace and security of the region and of maybe the world as a whole. But in terms of expecting strong action from the Security Council to enforce Ethiopia to adopt a certain stance against its current policy, I think that would be a bit unlikely at the moment. So I think it's more likely, if there's to be a resolution, and hopefully, again, just like we said, there will be, that the source of pressure will most probably come from either individual actors or international ones like the EU. And other major donors.
Yes. Well, as you said, hopefully so we reach that agreement. Now, talking about the security and sovereignty of Saudi Arabia and its own national security. Now, Egypt has joined the Saudi-led coalition, really battling Yemen, and that's been for a few years now, but still we see every now and then we hear about the bombings, the strikes, the drones coming from Yemen to Saudi Arabia, or Saudi Arabia retaliating. How do you view Egypt's cooperation with the Saudi-led coalition fighting the Houthis in Yemen?
I think the importance here of the role of Egypt is that despite the fact that it's a strong supporter definitely of Saudi's interests, it's also acquired a good set of relations with other countries in the region. So, for instance, for a while, Egypt was a broker in the negotiations happening between Houthis and the Saudi government, and several rounds of talks were held actually in Cairo for that purpose with the Yemeni opposition as well. So yes, Egypt definitely supports Saudi, but it does also have a big role to play if there is some sort of negotiations to start between the two parties. Recently in Iran, a new president was just elected, Ibrahim Raisi, over the past couple of days. And I think it would be important at this juncture for the countries to, maybe a country like Egypt, to take a step back and see what is going to happen right now with, will there be changes in the Iranian foreign policy regarding the escalation or lack thereof in Yemen. And also Egypt does have, again, ties with countries like Iraq, which again could be also a broker here, having a sizable Shiite community within its own ranks, and also historical ties and relations with Saudi Arabia. So there is an opportunity, I would say, with the incoming Iranian government, because maybe since Biden's administration has been sworn in, there is, I think, an increasing sense of some sort of approach within the region. Countries are kind of trying to de-escalate. We see that also in the case of Libya, Turkey. The rhetoric has changed. There are attempts now to forge some kind of reconciliation also between the regional powers. So Egypt does have a major role to play here, and just like we've seen in the Palestinian issue, and the ability of the diplomacy here, the role that can be played. I think in the case of Yemen also, there's a lot of room to be exploited by countries like Egypt.
Well, a lot of observers and analysts share this sort of optimistic view of the new president, Ibrahim Raisi, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. And a lot of people are hopeful that there would be some sort of a change in the political strategy and attitude of Iran's foreign affairs file. But then again, he made in his first press conference a day or two ago, he mentioned that, yes, he's still up to negotiate the nuclear deal, but he won't do it for the sake of negotiations, and he actually refused to meet and ruled out meeting the American President Joe Biden. So at the same time, a lot of people are saying, well, maybe it's just the same sort of extension for Hassan Rouhani, and some people are saying, well, maybe it's just a way of negotiations with the nuclear file. But regarding the involvement, the regional involvement of Iran within the Middle East and the North African region, it might be changing. How much of this is true?
Well, I think, optimism or pessimism, that's not, you can be an optimist or a pessimist in international relations. We have these different schools of thought, but actions eventually are really what matter the most. Raisi is known to be a hardliner. He was elected with this kind of mandate also, and with a constituency to answer to. So it's expected, of course, in his first speech that he will have to sound harsh and he have to sound firm on such issues. But he also stated clearly that he's interested and still wants to pursue the deal with the U.S. And on the other hand, you also see different messaging still coming also from the U.S. that they're still interested in pursuing this deal. On the other hand, a country like Israel is very wary still of the fact that this agreement may still go ahead, and they're warning, especially again with a new government just being sworn in Israel, against this deal. So there are different signs, and you may adopt a pessimistic sort of stance or an optimistic one. Eventually, I think the most important, I would say, not only with this new government, but even in the weeks or the months that preceded that, there is a general tendency towards de-escalation. Whether this will be actualized in the Yemeni case in itself, or will it still be stagnant or ongoing as some sort of a protracted conflict whereby these countries kind of resolve or trying to send messaging to each other through this pocket in Yemen. I think eventually Saudi does have a great interest in resolving this issue in different ways, because again it's directly on its borders, and for quite some time it's been posing a great source of instability to its peace and security. So actions will judge eventually if an agreement is reached. If it's reached, I think the potential or the opportunity for reaching some sort of a resolution in countries or in files like the Yemeni one will definitely be higher.
Well, you've mentioned that Egypt is, regarding the new Iranian president, they're going to sit still and watch and observe and see how things are developing and try to understand or create some sort of an idea of the new president. But how is Saudi Arabia receiving the news of this President Ibrahim Raisi as the new Iranian leader? Are they optimistic? Are they pessimistic? And could we also suggest or expect the other Gulf countries following the same sort of position and attitude Saudi Arabia would have?
Well, again, the political hierarchy in a country like Iran is, you have to understand that the role of the president there is somewhat limited. The ability of the president in Iran to dictate foreign policy or determine the outlook of the country is quite limited when compared to other countries. You have the most important figure is, after all, the Grand Imam, or Ali Khamenei in that regard, the Murshid of the Iranian Revolution. So The role of the president, after all, is more of an executive. Definitely, he does have a vision, and his vision is important. But I would say mostly within internal affairs, within dealing, with different currents in Iran, and with the opposition forces, with economic also issues, and whether there will be a major change in the foreign policy of Iran as a result of this recent election of Raisi is still to be seen. I think most important, or the more important features that we need to look at are what, the issues that have been happening right before or a bit before the election of Raisi regarding the interest or the keenness of the Iranian administration on reaching some sort of an agreement with the U.S. and also the similar tendencies or messages stemming from the U.S. administration. And again, I believe that this will be key to other files in the region. Saudi Arabia would definitely I think they would be a bit worried because of the background of Raisi. And again, he's a hardliner. He's spoken harshly against the other regional powers. He's very adamant on stressing the importance of the Iranian Revolution and of the Shia doctrine. And this kind of messaging definitely sends worrying signals. I mean, the most recent example of a hardliner in the presidency of Iran was Ahmadinejad, and he's still, up until today, we still remember, his sort of flamboyant statements and stances and so forth. But after all, what matters the most is the action on the ground, and we'll see, as the coming days unfold, if the tendency or if the intention of this coming president is to be a bit more pragmatic and reach some sort of resolution on the ongoing files or not.
Yes. Dr. Fahmy, we're talking about Egypt and Saudi Arabia being the cornerstones of the Middle East region, pillars of security and stability for the region. They've been that way for decades. However, over the past 10, 15 years, things have changed. You've seen Egypt after 2011 and 2013 really getting back on its feet, reclaiming its position and pivotal role within the region and the international community. And at the same time, you see Saudi Arabia trying to diversify their economy, not just being dependent on petroleum. And you see the sort of a change in the attitude and a reimagination or a refurbishing of the look or the idea of Saudi Arabia as a country, as a kingdom. Do you feel, and we've also seen the image of the president with the ex-US President Donald Trump and the Saudi king making one of the biggest deals of the decade. Now, do you feel that the weight and the political roles being played now by Egypt and Saudi Arabia are a little bit different, a little bit more developed than it was for decades ago? How is it different?
Yeah, well, it was almost taken for granted prior that Egypt and Saudi are good friends. And this, maybe with the exception of the period of 1950s and 60s, where both countries almost headed different axes in the region. But I'd say ever since the 1970s onwards, the relations have been quite positive. Because, I mean, not only because they're important relations, but because there has been a level of agreement on the major issues. And this agreement, I believe, still remains between the two countries. You touched upon the point regarding economic interests, and that's very important. Saudi is currently, and for a while now, has been developing the NEOM project in the northern part of Saudi Arabia, and it's expected that with the growth in this project, also places in Egypt and Jordan also would be integrated into a greater economic zone, whereby greater international trade and movement of people and goods and services would be extended. So there's a great potential here to be, but in order for this potential to be exploited, you need to first and foremost reach and establish a sense of security and stability. So that's why it's really important, and I believe both countries, it's in the best interest of both countries to try and eliminate these sources of risk or threat to their own stability and security, whether in the case of Egypt it's the Jerd, or in the case of Saudi, the Yemeni file. Only then, I think the potential for growth and economic development can be achieved.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, trying to achieve and boost these trade and economic cooperation between both countries, there are ongoing steps taking place, especially the 17th Egyptian-Saudi Joint Committee that agreed to develop the trade cooperation. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
Egypt and Saudi Arabia have agreed to develop and promote aspects of cooperation in various production and services domains topped by trade, industry, investment, agriculture, health, education, transport, petroleum, media, environment, classifications and standards, as well as small and medium-scale projects, and financing, banking, customs, foods, medicines, health and mineral wealth. This came at the end of the 17th session of the Egyptian-Saudi Committee, which was met in Cairo. The committee was chaired by Egypt's Minister of Trade and Industry, Naveen Gameh, and Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Trade and Investment, Majid bin Abdullah Al-Qasavi. Gameh said that she and her Saudi counterpart signed an agreement that will see joint cooperation between the two countries enhanced in a large number of areas. This includes a commitment to the Greater Arab Free Trade Area (GAFTA) and the resolutions of the Economic and Social Council, and coordination between the Saudi Ministry of Investment, the Council of Saudi Chambers and Egypt's General Authority for Investment and Free Zones, to prepare for holding an investment forum in Riyadh. The Saudi side would also be invited to participate periodically and annually in the activities of the Cairo International Fair, which is the largest commercial and economic event organized by the Egyptian government. The Egyptian side suggested establishing joint logistic areas specialized in storing, packaging, manufacturing and exporting dates from both countries. Thus, in addition to establishing a joint entity to market dates to benefit from the international agreements in both countries. During the meeting, the emphasis was placed in cooperation and facilitating the movement of exports and trade exchange between the two countries for shipments of fresh fruits and vegetables. This would take place provided that each side provides that the other side with the shipments that are rejected at the port of arrival to take corrective measures against the violating companies. In addition, cooperation would take place in the fields of energy, industry and mineral wealth.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Fahmy. Now, you've mentioned the economic cooperation and the trade relations between both countries, but with all the new developments that have been taking place over the past 10 years or so, things are looking, or really, it's very promising. It shows a lot of potential. We've seen talking about free trade zones, talking about developments in Sinai, talking about really trying to boost the tourism, even cooperation between both countries. How do you view, or when should we actually expect to see and bear the fruit of such potential, especially in the tourism sector and the developmental projects that will be taking place maybe in Sinai and the rest of the Egyptian governorates?
Well, in the tourism sector, I think both countries, in the case again of Saudi Arabia, it's after all the country where the holy shrines of Islam are present, so having the COVID dilemma is a big issue there, because it's limiting their ability to host the millions that usually annually visit the country for that purpose, and still continues until this year.
Yes.
And the same also for Egypt. The tourism sector has been hardly hit because of COVID again. So hopefully, with both countries again managing to deal with the crisis in the best way possible. Egypt has previously announced that by the end of this year, they're hoping to achieve at least 50% rate of vaccination for the population. If this is achieved, I think it will definitely help a lot. Of course, Saudi has a much more enhanced set of health facilities and resources. So in their case, also the rates of vaccination and dealing with the pandemic have been very decent, I would say, over there. So this is a major challenge that both countries have to navigate. So maybe, hopefully, with the beginning of next year, and again, as we mentioned earlier, with more success in dealing with their own issues of national security and stability, the chances for increase in economic cooperation and economic growth on both sides will be much better.
Well, it also seems that Saudi Arabia will probably be quite involved in the energy sector here, renewable energy, greener energy, talking also about water desalination, which Saudi Arabia is probably much more developed in this sort of sector and industry. And can this really, I mean, talking about the Ethiopian dam and the water scarcity, the potential water scarcity, talking about the developmental infrastructure projects, talking about having a new delta in Egypt as well. How important do you think Saudi Arabia's involvement and cooperation in such a field would be for Egypt?
Very important, and it's a bit of maybe a painful issue for us to discuss, talking about water scarcity and resorting to desalination as a solution to the problems. But I mean, honestly, Egypt is, even when with its current resources of water, is still considered as a poor country in terms of water resources. Most recently, there was actually a study that was issued by Basira, the Egyptian Center for Statistics, and it mentioned that Egypt is only able currently, we're talking even before the JERD, to achieve only 50% of its needs of water resources. So, resorting or depending on other sources of water, whether through underground water or desalination, were inevitable. They had to happen, and maybe this is a wake-up call also for us here to talk more and work more on water reservation, because this is a major issue that we had to go through. I mean, hopefully this will not only be triggered by the limitation in water supply coming or happening because of the JERD, but the need for Egypt to increase its resources from water has been there, and it's about time really we tackle that issue.
Well, trade ties between both countries have really exceeded about $5.5 billion, with Egyptian investment being in Saudi Arabia amounting to $1.4 billion. We're also talking about Bank Misr Bank will actually have a branch as well in Saudi Arabia. You've mentioned the impact of the pandemic on not just the economy of both countries, but the global economy as a whole. Would you feel that this can actually be some sort of a bonus for both countries, being such neighboring countries and really having some sort of a stable economic... Egypt has actually shown growth, but would you say that this is a good opportunity for Egypt and Saudi Arabia to really benefit from each other's economic cooperation and investments?
Of course. Historically, both countries have had this, I would say, room or opportunity for complementary points of strength. Egypt is a very rich country in terms of its own labor and human capital. For Saudi Arabia, definitely energy resources. Now trying to diversify, also build their own sort of Saudization of their own resources and manpower. So the room is there, definitely. The opportunity for both countries to work together to complement what each of them needs in terms of development is there. And for a very long time, I think the classical relationship has been Egypt exporting its own labor to Saudi Arabia, while Saudi Arabia provides energy subsidies and so forth. And I think this is changing right now. We're seeing more diversification in both countries. And with this increasing reliance on the industry sector, for instance, on more trade ties, on even tourism in Saudi Arabia itself, the room for cooperation, for collaboration, for other kinds of expertise that can be provided by a country like Egypt with its long history and tradition in these fields will also increase. So in a sense, the diversification happening in Saudi can also be beneficial for Egypt because of the potential for this complementary set of ties between the two countries.
Yes. Well, Dr. Fahmy, we've been talking for a a few years talking about amending the investment law, how to attract foreign investors in Egypt, really making it an easy and fertile place to just come and do your business, start your investments here. How far are we working on the investment law, and how are we facilitating the investment atmosphere for Saudi investors coming to Egypt?
Well, I think there have been long strides in that area, really. And most recently, for instance, the issue of digitization also has been increasing. Now, the ability also of investors to apply for or to resort to electronic means of arbitration has been very also, I would say, a very significant development in that regard. So this is a very positive step because it helps, it encourages foreign investment. Saudi, as you mentioned, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, investor in Egypt in terms of FDI. So there's a huge room there to be exploited also by other investors. And Egypt has achieved a lot in that regard, but there's still a lot to be sought. There's still a lot of development that we can achieve, not only in the ease of doing business, which is very important, but also in magnifying the infrastructure, in complementing also other economic sectors in the country, like trade, transportation. A lot of development has happened in that, but we still need more. Also, in terms of the legal framework as a whole, it's not only the investment law, but you also have other legal ramifications that can impact and do impact the environment for investment and for industrial growth, for instance. These are areas that need still more work and that can potentially, if managed in the right way, also send the right messaging, because at this moment, again, talking about the pandemic, in a few months, and several developing countries are now looking to the post-pandemic era, what's going to happen after that. And there is a lot of competition because countries will be competing on showcasing their potential and telling the world that we're doing fine now, come invest here, because we have managed to get rid of that phase. So it's important also to know how to sell or market this message in the right manner to the rest of the world, because a lot of countries will be competing for that.
Yes. Well, talking about the post-pandemic, well, Egypt has shown some economic growth, and also Saudi Arabia, the price of the barrel of oil has actually risen. We were talking about, a couple of years ago, we were talking about $40. Now we're talking about the early $70. How do you see this really affecting a post-pandemic recovery or a post-pandemic way of life for both countries?
Well, in the case of Egypt, I think it's maybe a bless in disguise that we are still dependent to a great extent on the informal sector, and that a lot of economic activities are happening not necessarily within the official circles of the economy. And this gives us some sort of room for maneuver and for flexibility when it comes to economic actions. And I think it's a big plus. And we need to build on that. We need to, and I think this has been happening, that the government is starting now to find ways of including the informal sector within the state somehow, because it's also beneficial for the people and the activities taking place in the informal sector, whether in terms of benefits for them or in terms even of screening, monitoring the status of the informal sector and being able to provide it with support if needed, and also depend on it in certain activities if needed. So this is, I would say, one of the most important factors why Egypt has managed so far, and hopefully it will remain this way, in absorbing the shocks of something like the COVID pandemic, because a lot of the dealings have been happening outside the official sort of structure. In the case of Saudi Arabia, because of the increasing uncertainty in the global market, of course, this has affected the price of oil, and the fact that there's still demand, but no one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So having this resource is definitely a source of security, of stability, of safety, if you will. But again, post-pandemic, this is not likely to be a sustainable thing. I think Saudi sensed that a long time ago, that they need to diversify. But in the short and medium, maybe, term, this should bode well for both countries.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Fahmy has stated and mentioned, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they do have historical relations that have been that go back for decades, if not even more. And we've seen that there is still a lot of cooperation taking place, and still a lot more needs to be done in terms of at least economic cooperation between both countries, both as well having and using their political weight as pillars and cornerstones for security and sovereignty for the Middle East region. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the Professor of Middle East Politics at AUC. Dr. Fahmy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.